Hey friends, welcome to my remastered tutorial on how to use leaderboards and the Get Leaderboard stat chip. We're going to learn how to configure these different stat chips and use them in a very simple way so that way you can incorporate them in your rooms to create different tycoons, racing maps, and otherwise. Let's get into it. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. First, select the backpack, and then select the Use button on your maker pen. Go ahead and take hold of it, hold it to your face, and then open the palette. Alright, now that you've grabbed your palette, we're going to grab a couple of different things that we're going to go over in this video. Start by going to the Gadgets tab, then selecting the Other Chips tab, and then select the Get Leaderboard stat chip. Go ahead and spawn one in for later. Then go to the second page, and then the Set Leaderboard stat chip, and spawn in one of these as well. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab a couple dynamic props. Under the prop tab, you can select dynamic, and then select the button. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and spawn in a leaderboard projector. Okay, one final chip we're going to use in this tutorial that's not necessary but helps to visualize things is under the Gadgets tab. You can select the output chip and spawn it in for later. Okay, now that we spawned in all the props and gadgets that we'll need, we're going to go ahead and briefly go over each of the individual ones to see how we're going to configure them for this demonstration. Go ahead and go to the configure option on your maker pen. You can select the button and it will pull out your palette. The first option you have there is to send player as signal on output. If you have this selected, whenever the button is pushed, it will send the player ID as the output on the red pin or the blue pin instead of the number 1. You can also change the name of the button and the tags if that's desired. Now we have our Set Leaderboard stat chip. You can use the wire tool on your maker pen to see what the pins do. You have the player ID, stat channel, and value displayed as inputs on this chip. There are no outputs. This chip can only be used to input information. There's also this yellow X button, which means that it has not been configured yet. We'll get into that in a moment. For the red pin, the player ID is who you're setting the stats for. Whoever's player ID is sent into the chip is where the stats will be set. The green pin is for the stat channel. On the leaderboard, there are up to currently 3 different stats you can set. The last pin is the value pin. This can be a positive or negative integer and will be used to increase or decrease the value of the player stat. Okay, going to our configure options, we can select the Set Leaderboard stat chip and we'll pull up a short list. We have multiple different behaviors to choose from. The first behavior is the set always behavior. We have the increment behavior and the set if greater and set if less. If we choose the set always behavior, the icon will change on the chip to this green arrow. This means that no matter what value is being sent into the chip under the blue value pin and the red player ID, it will always set that value. Next, we have the increment value. This will change the green pin to the plus sign. This will allow you to increment the values, either positive or negative, to whatever the existing stat value was in the channel. If you change it to the set if greater, the symbol will also change, and if the value being sent into the chip is greater than what the current value is, it will replace the value, otherwise it will do nothing. Similarly to set if less, it's just the opposite. Okay, next we have our Get Leaderboard stat chip. Using the wire tool on your maker pen, you can see what the pins do. We have an input for the player ID and the stat channel, and the output for also the player ID, stat channel, and value. Whenever you send a player ID to this chip, it will try to figure out what channel you want the value from. And then once it's retrieved that data, it will send an output through these last 3 pins. There will be a delay in the time it takes for the input to send an output. It does not reliably take 1 tick. Please incorporate the appropriate measures into your games so you're not losing data for some reason. There are no configurations for this particular chip. Okay, let's take a look at the leaderboard. You can use the configure option on your maker pen and select the leaderboard projector. There's a couple of different options we can choose. The first thing we have is a show leaderboard stat. We can show or hide the leaderboard stats based on what we want to display in our room. You can also change the full name that's displayed at the top of the leaderboard, as well as a short name, which is displayed on the side of the leaderboard where all the stats are. You can also sort the existing data by ascending order or descending order, and you can change it from an integer to a time value, depending on your needs. Similarly, with the other stats, you can choose between stat number 2 settings and stat number 3 settings. For this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and change stat value number 1, selecting the name, and we're going to change this value to the word money. As you can see, the title of the projector has now changed. I'm going to also change the short name on the top right hand side to a $sign. As you can see, the $sign is now displayed on the right hand side. Okay, now that we know what these chips do, we can start using them in practical ways. To start out, we're going to go ahead and use the wire tool on our maker pen, and we're going to wire some things together, starting off with the button. When this button is pressed, I would like the player ID to be sent through this wire to the player ID of the set leaderboard stat chip here. Currently, the button is sending the value number 1 because we did not configure it to the player ID yet. You can go to your configure tool, select the button, and make sure that the send player output is checked. Okay, once you have that configured, we'll take a look at the next 2 pins of the set leaderboard stat chip. In this case, it's the stat channel and the value. We're going to go ahead and configure the value of the stat channel to be the first channel, which we configured on the leaderboard to be money. Additionally, we're going to configure the value of the blue pin to be an incremental value of 1. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and configure the chip itself to make sure it's on the incremental value. Once you have the chip selected, with the configure tool, you can pull out your palette and make sure it's selected on increment there. Okay, so say that we have this situation where we're now having someone press a button to earn additional money, but we want to know how much money they've earned. We can use the Get Leaderboard Stat Chip to do that. By using the wire tool on our maker pen, we can select the player ID here, and we can also configure the stat channel to be stat channel number 1. Once we have that information, we're going to go ahead and send the value of what that returns to the output chip here. This is a visual display. You can also send it to other chips to do different things, such as decrease values, increase values, or check things, or otherwise. Now, when this button is pressed, we can see that the value that displayed up here was the number 19. I've pressed this button 19, then 20, 21, 22, and so on. Alright guys, one other important thing to know is that these chips can be rate limited. If you're using them automatically or sending signals through them very often over short periods of time, it may end up be the case that they will be rate limited, which makes it so every 30 seconds or so, the values will be sent up to the servers or retrieved from the servers. What that means is if a player leaves your room before their data is saved within that 30 seconds, it's possible that their data may get lost. It's also possible that the value you're sending from your Get Leaderboard Stat Chip may not be sent to your outputs, wherever they may be, if you're using it far too often. Please make sure you're using them appropriately so that way you can account for these things as you need to. Alright, that's the basics of what you need to know in order to use the Set Leaderboard Stat Chip and the Give Leaderboard Stat Chip along with the Leaderboard Projector. Hope you found this pretty helpful. If you'd like to see more tutorials, please comment down below so I can know what to make. Thank you for watching. Have a good one, guys.